Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University. Welcome to Outrider 38, Put the Problem into the Work. Now, this is our second instalment in our Use the Difficulty series. Now, I'm well aware whenever I use the phrase, put the problem into the work, all my students, the hundreds of graduate students that I've taught around the world, start to groan. And there's a reason for that, because my particular phrase, put the problem into the work, is one of the key tropes in my supervisory portfolio. So today we're going to talk about this particular way of thinking, this intervention in your taken for granted candidature. You think things are going well and then a problem hits. What do you do? Say something really unexpected happens in your research. Say, for example, that the equipment breaks down. Say the samples that you expect to arrive from another university don't appear. Say, for example, you constructed this magnificent survey and then you sent it out to the world and nobody did the survey. So you've ended up with a very, very small data set. Maybe you've gone out to field work and the field work just didn't really happen. You went out into the field and nothing occurred. Greatest example I always use of this, of course, for all our sharkies out there. Hello to all the shark researchers. So you go and do field work to go engage with the sharks, and of course, no sharks appear during the season. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, my argument is you should put the problem into the work. Now, you may be one of those students where everything's going well. Everything started so well. It's all going beautifully. And then at about the 18-month mark, your PhD Titanic hits its iceberg. Every thesis, every piece of research is judged by these pivotal moments. Wow, that was unexpected. This data set doesn't actually fit the argument that I'm trying to make. That evidence works directly against my research question, or wow, I tried that and it really, really, really didn't work. The question is therefore, colleagues, what happens next? Does your research project end? So there's been a failure and it's over? Do you stop? Do you freeze? Now, students' candidatures have been destroyed by this panic, this stopping, this freezing. Now, as a supervisor, let me tell you what this looks like from my perspective. So a student comes for their weekly meeting and my goodness me, it's all gone pear-shaped. The student is often agitated, desolate, sometimes crying, you know, like the ugly Oprah cry, that sort of behaviour. And the student arrives in the meeting and says something like the following: my thesis is not going to work. I am stuck. I'm out of here, girlfriend. I'm out of here. My PhD is over. And of course, desperate questions like, what the hell is happening in my research? So these expressions, these heightened emotional states, come from a moment of research panic, desolation, confusion, and fear. And of course, it's a legitimate fear. It's real. Is this thesis going to work? And so enters my phrase, my trope, my theory about research. Put the problem into the work. There are lots of functions, lots of meanings of that phrase for students at different stages of their career. But also, colleagues, put the problem into the work is a key moment of research integrity. It is a moment where you demonstrate to your examiners, but also to the world, that your research is transparent and it is accountable. It's so common, particularly when we have brilliant students And I see this particularly with brilliant students who've had a great undergraduate career, great honours, great capstone work, and then they enter a PhD program confident, knowing they're doing well, and then boom, a problem happens. And of course they don't have what I would describe as the academic literacies to be able to manage the problem because they've been an incredibly successful student. And when this problem does occur, and it's when not if, when this problem does occur, the student's confidence, very sense of self is shaken. And as I said, it's often the really brilliant, the really academically talented and rewarded students who most lose their way when something goes wrong. And when something goes wrong, it may be something like they had a beautiful research design, and you know, that's great when you've got a beautiful research design, but of course, the research design hasn't worked. So what do you do if the research design doesn't work? Do you go, the research design hasn't worked and just sort of sit in it? Or you develop another research design? A classic example is equipment fails, particularly in equipment science, physics, chemistry and so forth. If the equipment fails, engineering's another great example. When the equipment fails, well, the project's over. What can you do? Your samples don't arrive. But what happens is also the students realise, again about the 18-month mark, okay, well, they've got a thesis, they've got a couple of publications, but the thesis itself is lacking scope and scale. It's small. It's a small research project. So what happens next? And that's my methodology. Let's put the problem into the work. And let's go through with what I do with students from that very moment of panic. So a student presents in my office in this heightened state. Something has gone wrong with their research and they think it's over. They think they've lost their thesis. They haven't. Once they tell me, I think everything's gone south, Dara, it's really bad, this is really, really bad, this is not going to work. And can I say, that happens about once a fortnight in my office. So this is very, very common, firstly. I know every student thinks they're the only person this has happened to. It happens to every researcher all the time. Okay, so when it's clear that we've got a problem, I get the student to speak the problem, to explain to me what's gone wrong. So I either get them to turn on their phone recorder, put on their memo function, and we record it on their phone, or I use my Zoom. I always take my Zoom into my office so that if something does go wrong, and of course, you know, once a day something weird happens, then we're able to record this conversation. And I'll explain why the recording matters in a second. So I ask the students to express to me what has happened in full and frank emotional detail, granular. Every step of when they discovered something was wrong, what they think is wrong, and what they think are the consequences of that wrongness. Now, what's happened often is something bad's happened in the fieldwork. So, or indeed nothing's happened in the fieldwork. That's often the most common. They think, well, this is going to be, I'm going to fieldwork, or I'm going to this archive and I'm going to find these amazing sources. And of course they travel all this distance, you know, and then they get to the archive and either the objects are not there or they're not very good. Or they go to fieldwork, nothing happens, equipment fails. The other problems, and these two are increasing in the last 5 years. So a piece of research emerges, remember we've got a proliferation of journals, right? So a piece of research emerges that directly contradicts the very foundation of their research. So they earnestly put in place all these research questions, and a fantastic piece of research has emerged that shows that these research questions are pretty naive and pretty basic. Or indeed, for some students, perhaps even worse, a piece of research appears that has already done the thesis. So they're in the middle of a thesis, they're doing this research, and a refereed article, peer-reviewed piece of research appears that has done the research. Here are the research questions, here are your outcomes, we're done. So I get the student to explain in detail, in depth, in clarity, what has happened, the what question. Now, the reason I do that is firstly, putting the problem into language renders the problem understandable, and it controls the emotion and allows higher thought to emerge, because you are constructing a narrative. And of course, when you construct a narrative, it also means there's going to be an ending to that story, but you've got to write that ending. So that means that the emotional mess can suddenly be cooled and calmed and shaped into a research story. So it's not spooky, it's not a black box, it's not an iceberg, it's just a thing that's happened. Let's talk about the thing. So that's the first stage. Record, speak the words, what has happened. The second stage, we provide the solutions. And this is an important meta moment in our lives and in our relationships, colleagues, because no one really tells you this. So I'm going to tell you. When we recognise the problems, the flaws, the missteps, the inaccuracies, when we recognise that the problems, the failures, are actually part of the research, and further, the weird stuff, the failures, the flaws actually create your best research, then that's transformative of a PhD. It's also transformative of your life. So I'm going to be clear here. The problems that you're sitting in will actually create your best research. So I ask students now to transcribe their recording. So listen to it, put the headphones on and start to type out what they said to me. Get all that out so they're calm because they're just transcribing. And then I ask them to take the next step. And that is write down the consequences of this problem on the thesis and on research. So what happens next? What are the consequences? And you're thinking about your thesis, but you're also thinking about the consequences of that problem on already existing knowledge. Okay, now this stage does two things. Firstly, it allows the student to place this terrible problem, failure, issue into a context to render it manageable, and then it enfolds it back into the thesis to show the work that is yet to be done. Now remember, the point of research is to manage surprises. It's the unexpected stuff that happens in research that's the gift. The weird stuff actually is the research. If everything was predictable, then it's not research. It's Bold and the Beautiful. Oh, rich, oh, rich. Research is not a soap opera. Research is unexpected, it's weird, it's challenging, it's surprising, and that's the brilliance of it. So once we've assessed what has occurred and then placed that problem in the wider framework of the thesis itself, then we move to the final stage, the third stage, where we put the problem into the work. So what I do is I send students away with their recording, we write through what's happened, we get the emotions out, and then we're able to construct and configure where this intervention will sit in their thesis. So what we do is once we've got this written document of what the problem is and the consequences of it, then we come back together and we assess where that piece of writing may go in the thesis itself. So for example, if you've got that disruptive article or book or monograph or output, then we work out where we're going to position that writing in the literature review. So that pivotal article becomes the pivot of the literature review, the springboard for the next stage. Not a problem, a gift. You've demonstrated that you've done your research, you're up to date, and you're taking on already existing knowledge and transcending it. For example, if something's happened with the equipment or with your field work, then this intervention, this problem, goes into your methodology chapter. And if there's something odd that's occurring with the data, then it alters your data analysis and your discussion. So as you can see, whatever words you're writing, it goes into a part of the thesis and it enhances the thesis. This disruptive moment in your thesis almost always makes your thesis. Examiners lose their mind when they see a student has confronted a challenge, discussed the challenge in granular detail, and then transcended it. Examiners love this. They love this. So go with the disruption. Go with the grain, right? Go with the grain. Swim with the tide for me. And look, my father used to describe this as steering with the skid. My father, Kevin, is 95 years of age. He's about to turn 96. And he taught me how to drive. He really didn't. He sat in the vehicle with me and went, Jesus, a lot. But one lesson he did teach me while he was teaching me how to drive was to steer with the skid. And that lesson stayed with me in driving, but it's also stayed with me in life. Because when something bad happens, you don't steer against the skid, you steer with it. And that's how you get out of the problem. So write up that self-standing piece, what happened, put the problem into the work, and then we work out where that bit of writing is going to go in the thesis. And it will change the thesis. So don't think, oh, look, we've got 1,000 words, we'll put it somewhere and we can keep going. No, this moment will change the entirety of your research project. Now, for people that are going through this process, another thing that happens is their writing suffers. And I've been thinking a great deal with students coming to me and saying, oh, look, I'm finding writing very difficult. And I'm trying to work out what they mean, because I don't think it's what they think it means. And when you've got a writing problem, there are many causes of it. And there could be an example where someone's so stunned by the problem that they just can't write anymore, or indeed, and I hate this phrase, I'll use it, the writer's block is actually the problem. What's the problem in the work? I can't write. So writing through why there is a writing problem is also incredibly beneficial. So if there is something that's stopping you writing freely, then ask yourself this question: why are you having trouble with the writing? What is going wrong? Put that problem into the work. So write about the block. Tell me in granular detail about the block, where it came from, and therefore you can come up with a solution. So write about the problem with the writing, and you'll be amazed that an important shard of knowledge or interpretation emerges when you write about writing. Putting the problem into the work has improved every single thesis that I have supervised. And remember, we're dealing with hundreds of students that I have supervised. Do not allow yourself or your friends around you to wallow in the problem. Tell me about the problem. Get inside the problem. Explain the shape and the structure of the problem to me. And let's write through what we've learned through the problem. So this is a great strategy if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're unsure, if you're a bit frightened. Write through the problem. Writing, I know, can be incredibly confrontational at this stage, and of course that's why in my three-prong process we record your emotional state and the story first, because what we're trying to do is take the pressure off your writing, because the first stage you're simply transcribing what you've said. So this is the advice I use in supervision. This is the advice I use in my research life. And I apply this every single day. As I always say, a teacher is merely a student with delusions of grandeur. So I wanted to finish off this technique with one more maxim or slogan to help you move forward in your life. And again, this slogan or phrase transformed my research and my professional life. Now, I've written a lot of books. I've written a lot of articles. I think I'm now at 600 research outputs. And remember, in my fields, almost all of those are singly authored. Okay, so I've been very fortunate that so many of those books and articles have been well received, and I have a wonderful, loyal audience. Hello to all the wonderful readers out there. I am so thankful of your time. And so readers tend to stay with me through my career. And unbelievably, on 2 stages during my writing career, I received an incredible accolade of 2 of my books being the Times Higher Education Book of the Week, right? Oh my goodness me, I can die. Imagine a little random woman from Australia getting that opportunity. Unbelievable. And those 2 books were Thinking Pop and Digital Dieting. Now, Thinking Pop was reviewed in the Times Higher Education by an absolute hero of mine, Professor Fred Inglis, who was the emeritus professor at Sheffield University. And Fred is a man who changed knowledge. Can't say that about many people on the planet, but Fred Inglis changed knowledge. The idea that he reviewed one of my books and he loved it, well, you know, I can die now. That's it. I don't need anything else. But I wrote to him after the review appeared. I never met him, never knew him at all. But after the review appeared, I wrote to him and thanked him for everything, really, for being just an amazing human being. And we started a lovely correspondence. I was still I had a British chair at that point, so I was a British professor, and so it was a lovely, lovely correspondence. And he offered me some advice through that correspondence that I still apply to this day, and I apply and work with my students through this bit of advice. Now, Thinking Pop was my 13th book. So I was a very experienced writer, and I had a British professorship at this time. So I was a very senior academic at this time. And yet, this bit of advice changed my scholarship. I was a different researcher after Fred offered me this advice. And the advice he offered me was, Tara, you have a tendency to assume the argument rather than make the argument. Now, I paused, I read the email multiple times, and I replied to Fred and I said, amazing statement there. Could you tell me a little bit more about what you mean about making the argument rather than assuming the argument? And he said, look, Tara, I love your writing, has a staccato style. You slam together ideas that no one's ever thought of doing. So don't change. Keep doing that. Keep doing all that you're doing. Love it. But he wanted me to make a change. He argued that when I was slamming together all these disciplines and ideas, I assumed that the readers would follow me. And he made the point that I shouldn't assume they'll follow me. I need to present the scaffold so that they will follow me. Make the argument, don't assume the argument. Now, that one bit of advice changed my research, my writing, my life, really. And it also changed how I supervise students from that point on. So in your own research this week, check if you are making an argument or you are assuming the argument. Check that your scaffold is in place. Show the reader, show the examiner, how you constructed the research rather than assume that they know. So I want to finish this Outrider with a really crunchy bit of this story, right? About the value of putting the problem into the work in terms of research integrity and indeed research misconduct. Think about the impact of not putting the problem into the work, not reporting the null results, not reporting the failure of clinical trials, which of course in most disciplines runs at 80% failure rate in clinical trials. In some disciplines, 90% of clinical trials fail. And yet how often do you ever read about those failures? And of course, what do you do with the survey results that never arrived? What do you do? So we're going to talk about failure studies in the final instalment of this trilogy with The Obstacle is the Way. But what happens methodologically and ontologically if you don't present the errors, the mistakes, the missteps, the absences. And what's happened is you've actually simplified your research. You've sliced off the errors. You've discarded data points. And can I say, I sort of laugh with this because my whole career has been based on the data points that other people discard. I pick up and go, thanks very much, let's take this for a walk. But if you just go, oh, right, well, that doesn't really fit the curve, we'll discard it. Think about the consequences of that. And that's where we consider principal component analysis, PCA. It's a method that comes from multivariate statistics, and this method is used for data sets with multiple dimensions, where multiple factors impact on the outcome. And let's be honest, colleagues, most data sets have these multivariant complexities, but I think we forget about that, so I'm going to get a prop. I'm just moving the prop generally across here. So let me show you. So say, for example, let's get the angle right. There we go. Let me show you. So say temperature. We're measuring temperature. Now, temperature is a singular data set and shape. So we can measure it. Here is time. We measure temperature every day, and that's the change to the graph. Fantastic. But say we need to understand global warming. Right? Now that requires multiple dimensions, and all of those dimensions are indeed connected. So PCA is brilliant because it allows us to understand complicated data. So that means, and I'll show you again, prop, we have an X, get that angle right for you, there we go. We have an X and a y-axis, right? And we have 4 quadrants. We have x, y positive, x, y negative. And data sets are plotted throughout all of those 4 quadrants. Too often in our analysis, and I see students do this on a daily basis, they simply draw a curve, or indeed they allow the software to draw a curve that is the quote-unquote best fit. But that curve reduces, it reifies, and it discards. Principal component analysis allows us to do a remapping of data. You see, it doesn't plot X against Y, but it looks at the parameters of the investigation to reveal the maximum variance. So when we're creating what's called a loadings plot, we start to see how each discernible entity impacts on behaviour. So it could be a big positive, it could be a big negative. Mostly, we just sort of see a variance in the data set, and we have to do some hard work to understand what that variance means. So this is when we're moving to eigenvalues and eigenvectors. But before we go there, let me give you an easy example if I can. Say you are a food researcher, a food scholar, big hi to all the food scholars out there, right? And say what you're trying to do is you're trying to work out the perfect fruit salad, right? And you've got a random list of ingredients and you commence a taste test. So you've got a bunch of people who are participants in your research and you're trying to determine what is the best tasting salad. Okay, so here's the simple way to do it, okay? There's your fruit salad, there's your sample numbers at the base, and then people just assess which particular fruit salad they like the best. And they give it a score between 1 and 10. Okay, now that's how most research sort of occurs, right? Okay, so people have assessed it, participant research, great. Now if we're doing really simple research, then we'll go, right, well, obviously, the fruit salad that received the 10 out of 10, that is the best salad, so our work is now completed. But of course, we're actually ignoring the problem. We're not putting the problem into the work, we're ignoring it. You see, the more honest and robust way of doing this analysis is look at all the ingredients in all the fruit salads. So what you discover when you do this type of analysis is that actually you're assessing all the different ingredients in all the different salads. And you discover something remarkable, that apples are actually the determinant of an effective fruit salad. you see that walnuts are sort of neither positive nor negative, they're in the middle, but my goodness me, olives and pesto are absolutely hated. But you've worked out that, look, if a fruit salad has apple in it, it's probably going to be okay. So you've put the problem into the work. You'll notice, by the way, when we were talking about olives and pesto, that they're sort of yucky. They're part of the problem. So you tend not to publish that participants did not like those particular ingredients. They were a fail. But you can see the gift of putting the problem into the work. And of course, you can then do the next stage when you can look at the dressings on the fruit salad. What's the best dressing? Is it lemon? Is it lime? Is it mango? Is it involving some sort of yogurt and testing all the yogurts? So as you can see, great research is not about focusing on the big wins or the great data sets or the breakthroughs. The best research, colleagues, is thorough, and it logs and it presents the missteps. It presents those weak scattering of data points as much as the strong and the dominant influence. The problem is, though, and I understand, I can hear you all screaming at me through the screen, the problem is that publishing and grants and funding, of course, want the big wins. They want the success. And think about the consequences of that, because we're living through that at the moment. That means the failures, the null results, the confusions, the weirdness is left out of research because the successes are funded. But actually, you see, ethical research commences and ends with an acknowledgement of the failures, the missteps, and the problems. Certainly there's a lot of academic comedy, I think, to be found with the craziness of our current research system. And look, there is bonkers stuff occurring at the moment about how research quality is valued. We know it's nightmarish. We've done a lot of work on the politics of citations. This stuff is bonkers. And there are profound ethical consequences of denying or masking or not publishing failures or indeed weak correlations. But I think about, the great journals, the weird journals that exist, like the Annals of Improbable Research that was founded in 1994, or the Ig Nobel Prize, which I enjoy every year. This is funny stuff, right? People recognise the stupidity of talking about research success in this way, and of course the consequences and what we lose when we don't talk about the failures and the missteps. But also, can I say, and I have enormous respect for this gentleman, there is actually great research to be published, and it can be incredibly highly cited if you have the courage to talk about the failures. And I think about Fogel's 2018 unbelievable article about why clinical trials fail. And that's the title, Why Clinical Trials Fail. Highly cited, but he gets right inside that problem, doesn't deny the 80 and 90% failure rate, but talks about why the failure happens. Put the problem into the work. Unfortunately, we have this assumption that we must not admit weakness, that we must all just simply celebrate research success. And I understand why I suppose people focus on success a lot, because when we put the problem into the work, we are fallible. And David Calnaves, in Fallibility at Work, a great book, argued that when we recognise the problems and the errors and the weaknesses, we change our very understanding of success. Wow. If you think about, and I've studied a lot of these, the really great discoveries from our universities, and you go deeply into understanding what that excellence looks like, you see that every entity of excellence is based on mistakes, is based on errors. You go through the history of the Nobel Prize. invariably, about a third of them, something went wrong, and they went, oh, something went wrong, and the wrongness created the research that formulated the Nobel Prize. The gift of problems, and they are a gift, is we as researchers, we have to work on building connections between past, present and future. We have to work really hard in thinking through the relationship between continuity and change. Importantly, we must never enact omission bias. We must never, ever forget about the errors or the missteps. They must be logged in methodology, because a whole series of research misconducts emerge through omission. We realise that the negative, the null, and where I live, the ambivalent results have a story to tell in and of themselves. The wisest of scholars sit in the problem. The wisest of scholars recognise the error or the flaw without shame or blame or fear or guilt. They make meaning from the mess. They demonstrate ethics, accountability and transparency in the reporting of their research. So what I'd ask colleagues, for all of us this week, is let's start to think about our assumptions and our expectations of research success and research excellence. Let's enact a much more rigorous alignment of methodology and epistemology. Let's put the problem into the work. And when we do so, we change the stories of research success that we've been hearing all our lives. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.